This episode of the Secure AF podcast is brought to you in part by AFCyberAcademy.com. You're listening to the Secure AF podcast. And now your hosts, Tanner Shin and Keelan Knox.
Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of the Secure AF podcast. I'll be your host for the day, Tanner Shin. I'm not usually the host of this one, but today we're going to run it up. And I've got me here joined with
Keelan Knox. Shannon.
Keelan's the best. There's nothing really more to say. We want to talk today about how to make your classes not suck. I recently taught a penetration testing class at B-Sides, Oklahoma this last weekend, and I think it went pretty well. I think it went pretty well. I had a lot of good feedback on it. That was my first penetration testing class. I've taught a whole lot of incident response classes before. And I also helped teach the incident response class that Andrew Peters put on at B-Sides. And I think that went great as well. So one of the things that I went into it thinking is I feel like a lot of these classes that you take are all, here's this theory, and you're talking about like an 8-hour, even a 2-day class, something like that. There's only so much you can really dig into. So I kind of approached it all with more of like a practical, like this is how I do this thing. This is why I do it. Here's information to dig into it.
I feel like most courses or classes that anyone takes on penetration testing, they lack that particular perspective in terms of understanding the practicality of it all. This is what I do. This is why I do it, and this is how I do it.
Yeah. You think it's more of kind of what I was referencing, where it's people just going about the theory. This is SMB. This is what SMB does. This is what SMB is typically used for. This is like where you spend 8 hours going over SMB, and that's great. If penetration testing is going to be your whole job, you should probably learn exactly what SMB does and why people use it. But if you are just trying to take I want to understand penetration testing better 1-day class, do you think it's more important to know the details like that? Or do you think it's important to know what is your penetration tester doing whenever you leave SMB with default configurations?
The latter.
Yeah.
Okay. I wouldn't necessarily, if it's a 1-day course or class and it's 1-day training, I don't think it's necessary to actually cover all the ins and outs of SMB. I think more so is, okay, this is something that you will see. You should definitely look into this more in more detail to capture or create or develop a more profound understanding of why this is a vulnerability, but this is a vulnerability to look for. This is why we look for it, and this is how you attack it.
Yeah. No, okay. Yeah, we're on the same page there. Yeah. The other thing I was thinking of that was actually by far the hardest thing to do was interactive labs. Man, setting up a lab that was where you were able to run responder, grab hashes, and be able to NTL and relay the hashes was an ordeal.
Was it more so because of the network?
Largely because of the network, yeah. So we set up 2 domain controllers, a couple of servers, kind of a workstation, and there was what we ended up having to do was scripting authentication to where there was actively users trying to reach out to these shares. Yeah. Because otherwise you can't get anything going on. And then there's also a lot of kind of secret sauce that was happening where you've got the way that AWS wants to work is everything's basically on a VRF, so there's no true layer 2. Right. So you have to have a way to kind of emulate that as well. Mm-hmm. Getting actually set up, I think, is important because I wanted to show impact of it though, because I was like, what's the number one way that we get domain admin within the first 30 minutes?
How much time did you have to piece together or put together this training?
Not as much as I would like.
Gotcha.
Yeah, not as much as I would like. Realistically, a couple of weeks, but that was doing full-time pen test during the day and everything like that, and then ended up kind of a few days prior really like, okay, I have unfinished labs. I had most of the course written out, like these are the things that I want to teach, but my labs weren't really functional. And that was where I was like, all right, this is, now we got to get going.
Yeah.
And I found some other good projects to build off of and everything as far as like the Active Directory infrastructure and all that. And that was really a godsend for me. But I think that I've done a lot of these classes where they just have a singular box and they're like, okay, maybe they run Metasploitable, something like that.
Right.
And they say, this is Metasploit. You can find these exploits on this box and you can exploit this vulnerable FTP. You can exploit this vulnerable telnet. You can sniff a password and get a telnet. You can sniff packet capture, get telnet, whatever. I feel like that's still the way a lot of classes are. And
I agree.
I feel like it's 2012 pen testing.
I agree.
I don't think it's hardly relevant.
What would you say should be relevant in terms of penetration testing courses or classes?
I sat down and I thought about what is the workflow that I do on a pen test and what are the most common things that find me like a domain administrator account or that get me a foothold, that get me a privilege escalation.
Gotcha.
So I thought, what's really like the first thing I'm doing? Well, I'll do a PCAP and I'll see what's going on. But realistically, I'm doing that to see if I should run Responder.
Right.
So I wanted to make sure, okay, have to get Responder working. And the number one way if we're getting domain admin or we're getting a high level account within 30 minutes of sitting down, the number one way that we do it is NTL and Relay because people still don't have SMB signing.
Now, in terms of, I'm sure that there's going to be several listeners who have somewhat of experience in penetration testing.
Yeah.
But for those who aren't familiar with the pen testing process or the mindset and so forth going into an engagement, what is Responder and what does it do?
So yeah, Responder is basically just going to sit there and do a sort of man-in-the-middle poisoning type of attack. So it's going to look for all these protocols that are default in Windows, MDNS, LLMNR, NetBIOS, and mostly they're naming services. So it's whenever you don't have DNS on a network, that way computers can still talk to each other with a host name. It's useful, but the majority of the environments that we encounter, we're talking about people who have domain name servers set, right? Everybody's running DNS. They don't necessarily need LLMNR and MDNS most of the time. Now it can break stuff in certain environments, but the vast majority of the time it is there because people forgot to turn it off.
Gotcha.
So Responder takes that and it'll say, whenever you reach out to a file share and you say, hey, who has FS01? And FS01 will say, hey, that's me. Only instead, I'm saying, hey, I'm FS01, and then I'm letting that relay along.
And if the environment is configured properly, a lot of that communication between the network should be encrypted, correct?
Well, yeah, so that's whenever you get into like signing. So you start talking about the relay because technically it's sort of encrypted. But you start talking about signing, where it's verifying where it's really sent from and where it's going to.
Right.
And that's whenever we talk about relay. So what I just mentioned, NTL and relay is a huge, extremely common attack for us to do.
Yeah.
And it shouldn't be because it's not new.
Especially when SMB
remains that way.
is not configured properly.
Right, because signing by default, well, actually on new, that may be changing very soon, but signing by default is not enabled.
Right.
So what we do is we take that, once we find that we get hashes on Responder, we fire a tool like NetExec, which I'm doing a podcast with the devs soon. Look forward to that. You guys look out for that one.
That'd be awesome.
So you take a tool like NetExec or CrackMap or something, and you look to see if SMB signing is turned on across the network.
Yeah.
If it's not, you tell it, okay, generate me a list of everybody who doesn't have that on. And then you run Responder, you run a relay, and then you start seeing all these sessions check in. And these are all, depending on the privilege level of the user, these are all sessions that you can dump hashes from. You can get password hashes from the machine. You can get an interactive shell on the machine. You can stage malware on the machine. So it's a pretty big deal.
Now once a pen tester discovers that SMB signing is not enabled by default, and they discover that they're able to actually capture those password hashes. Are they able to use the password hash in order to gain access to other devices like the domain controller and so forth?
So it depends on the session that you get. If you can gain like a domain administrator session on a relay, you don't even need a hash necessarily.
Really?
Yeah, because you can just relay that domain administrator account straight to a domain controller.
Right.
And then from there, you can pop a shell. You can do whatever you need to. You can create yourself a user. Typically, that's my go-to. Is if I have a domain administrator account, I'm going to try to create myself my own domain administrator. And what I do from that is I don't need to crack your domain administrator password.
Right.
Maybe it's 35 characters long, and I'm never going to crack it. I don't need to because I just relayed it. And then if you can't relay, then yes, you're looking at a lot more of cracking, because at the end of the day, going back 3 steps, Responder is still capturing hashes. That's what the tool's doing. That's what it does.
When you refer to the word cracking and popping the shell, you remind me of someone from Louisiana.
All right. Anybody I know?
Possible, maybe.
All right, we'll talk later. So yeah, that's always the goal, right? Well, I guess your goals are defined for your penetration test. Your goals should always be defined with your customer on the penetration test.
Gotcha.
But typically, if you can get a domain administrator account, your goals are not going to be too hard to get. And so that's usually my goal is I want to make myself an account. Taking over an account is great, but if I can make myself an account, even better.
Yeah. That does sound a lot more reasonable. Of course, it may be difficult to have access or credentials to, once you gain access to an environment, to create an account, but it just depends on what permissions you see that you have.
Right. And we went through ASREP roasting, Kerber roasting. We went through kind of some more traditional exploitation using Print Nightmare. Mm-hmm. I wrote up a DLL for everybody that they could push to all kinds of machines that had Print Nightmare vulnerable on them. So they could create a user account on all of those machines as a local admin. I wrote up a web shell, and there was a web service in the environment that had an upload. Mm-hmm. And so we could upload our web shell, and then we could just browse the ASP file. And then from there, you could just issue CLI commands straight into it.
Gotcha.
So yeah, we kind of had our bases pretty well covered. But one of the things that I also wanted to go on about is talking about reports.
Yeah.
Because I figure
I feel like it's very important when it comes to pen testing.
It's the most important thing.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, that is your deliverable to a customer. Like if you're a programmer, your deliverable is the program. The program's going to ship. Right. If you are a bricklayer, your deliverable is the wall, right? You're going to lay those bricks. That is your wall. At the end of the day, whenever we hack people, we do all these things. We test all these things. We find all these problems. We know how to fix them. Our deliverable is the report. Like if we gain access to their systems and we exfiltrate sensitive data and we don't tell them how we did it and how to fix it, it doesn't do them any good.
Why is that?
Well, at that point you're just being a hacker, right? That's the difference between a hacker and a penetration tester is authorization and a report.
Gotcha. That is very true, because I'm trying to understand why if you tell a client that has authorized you to perform a penetration test against their environment, just because you provided them with a deliverable or report that states that, hey, I gained access to this, that, and the third, but it doesn't explain how you went about doing that, like the steps taken. I'm just curious to know.
How are they going to fix it?
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, how are they going to fix it? That's what they need to know. They'll say, okay, cool, wow, you're so cool, but what does this do for me? What does this do for my business? Why did I pay you for this?
Now, do most clients actually, or customer, like people who pay for penetration testing services, are they more so interested in fixing it by recreating the pen test steps that were taken to gain access to different things here or there?
Occasionally. Most people, I think, don't necessarily want to recreate the whole attack. A lot of them also understand that they can be very involved. It can be a lot of work to actually go recreate the attack.
Yeah.
And a lot of them just think, okay, I see your proof. I understand this. I understand this is the fix. And they just go fix it. We do have some that want to go through the full-blown attack path and really do it. But also that requires quite a bit of skill and quite a bit of training on its own.
I agree.
Because while I'll tell you steps to recreate, I'll tell you what I did. At the end of the day, it's not my job to train you to be a pen tester. Like I'll happily show you how we did it, but if you run into some problems that you can't recreate, I'll prove to you we can do it. but it's
Speaking of, AF Cyber Academy.
There you go. Get the plug. Get the plug. We will train you how to do this. Yes, this is true. This is true. Yeah, we got Cyber Academy where you can do a 5-day course in pen testing. Like the 1-day course I just did, only instead of scraping surface of let me try my hardest to cram everything into 6-7 hours, it is 8 hours, 5 days of, really going at it.
I feel like a common myth for people who are interested in getting involved or getting into pen testing, they believe that they need a certain less level of coding skills in order to become a sufficient pen tester.
Yeah.
Do you believe that that's true?
No, you need to know to use a computer, which is interfacing with code,
Right.
at some level, whether that's the level of I click buttons in Excel or that's the level of I'm running PowerShell or I'm running Python scripts or something like that. And that's the level I think most penetration testers can live at, is that you need to have some Bash knowledge, you need to have some PowerShell knowledge, you need to understand to work with Python, because most of the tools that you're using, even if you're not using them, are going to be written in Python or Go or Rust, but largely Python.
Right.
And so you're going to have to deal with, hey, this has an error. You need to know to do like pip install. You need to know how to fix these errors and do these basic things, but you don't necessarily need to know the foundational coding. You don't need to know assembly. You don't need to know C# to do really digging into this stuff. Now, there is a level in where you start getting into more like senior principal level type of tasks, where you are doing a lot of obfuscation. You're trying to do EDR detection or EDR evasion and things like that, or detection. You're trying to write up maybe you're writing a command and control server from scratch that won't be detected.
Right.
Maybe you're looking for a new exploit. You're looking for 0 days and that type of stuff. That's where the coding knowledge really comes in. But I think that you're right. A lot of people, they go, all right, I've got my computer science degree. I did 2 more years of coding. I'm ready to go be a pen tester. But they can't tell me anything about Active Directory. They can't tell me anything about subnetting. They know a bunch of coding knowledge that is not actually useful.
Right.
Which is why we didn't really touch any of that. Well, I did write I wrote a DLL. I wrote a web shell. Like, I wrote these things for the class that I taught last week, but I didn't really cover it.
Really?
I was like, yeah, this exists. This is what it does. Let's move on. Like, it doesn't really matter. You can find 1 million of those particular web shells out on GitHub for you to use.
I agree.
You need to understand enough to look at it, make sure it's not doing something crazy or malicious or something like that. Kind of understand what you're looking at, but you don't need to dissect it and write it.
I agree. I feel like it more so, like, coding or scripting is more so what I feel like pen testing consists of, as opposed to programming as a whole.
Generally. Generally. The vast majority of it. Yeah. And when you get into more of the advanced, the threat emulation and red teaming and stuff, it gets a little more heavy on the coding side because you're doing a lot of custom stuff. But largely the job of a penetration tester is to test 2 things. You are testing for known attack vectors, so you're not really writing them. And you are testing for, you're testing their controls at the end of the day. You're testing their controls, not anything else. So if you're saying, okay, I got this 0 day, I got this 0 day, it pops a shell that avoids all EDR, and I'm going to hit it on this particular server, and I'm going to get a shell. What good does that even do your customer? So you have 2 things that nobody else has. What are you proving? Like, I don't know. That's a different soapbox, but
It is. I agree. I'm curious to know, what are your thoughts on continuous penetration testing as a service?
Oh, I think it's pretty cool. Yeah, I think it's the way the whole industry is moving largely also.
Really?
I know it's something we've been kind of kicking around ways that we can manage that in-house, and there's a lot of difficulties on our side of making sure we have a platform that people can view and things like that. I know we've got some pretty cool stuff in the works for all that, but I think it's good because whenever I am on a pen test, if an exploit drops, I find it on Twitter, I download it from GitHub. Let's say 3 a.m, the exploit drops. 5 a.m, I wake up, I'm doing cardio. I'm looking at Twitter, seeing these exploits.
Right.
Okay, cool. 6:30, I'm done, I'm getting ready. I'm going to download that.
Yeah.
And then on my way there, or as soon as I get to the office, as soon as I get there, I'm going to verify that this code is not malicious, that this is something we can use, and then I'm going to hit them with it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm talking about something that's a few hours old.
Right.
Right? Like, I think that because of that, the continuous pen testing is good, because that's what threat actors are doing. They're not going, oh, well, it's been a quarter, time to check up on my victims. Like nobody's doing that.
Especially since the industry as a whole is so fast moving.
It's incredible. It has to be fast moving.
Yeah.
Because the threat actors are fast moving. Yeah. They find that same exploit. They're doing exactly what I did. They're going, okay, cool. Does this work? Can I weaponize this?
Right.
And then they're writing a script that goes and scans everything for it. They're going on Shodan, they're going on Census, they're going on FOFA, and they're going, okay, what are these devices that I can hit with this? And then they're going to just hit all of them.
Right.
Maybe 5% of them work. That's great for them.
Which it's cool that you say that, and interesting that you say that, because they're developing the script to pretty much scan for everything. They're not looking at things one by one or targeting something very specific. They may, but they're just also looking to see if it's vulnerable.
Yeah, and I get a lot of questions about that whenever I'm speaking with customers or teaching classes, as people ask, what kind of industries do you see this in?
Right.
Man, they generally don't care about industry.
They don't.
There are some where, you get these targeted phishing attacks and things like that. But I would say at least 90%, if not more, they do not care about your industry. You were attacked because you ran a Palo Alto and a Palo Alto exploit came out.
Especially from an incident response perspective, I feel as though like every time we are called to respond to an incident, once we're able to identify what actually took place and transpired, we get asked this question all the time: why us? Why were we targeted?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
because you didn't patch. I mean, I'm sorry. I'm sure we've got customers listening to us that have been through that situation, but I mean, they know it's true. It's generally something slipped through the cracks. Right. They didn't have the manpower for something. A vendor left something out that was their job to patch. They didn't patch. It's generally you didn't patch. You didn't have
the hardware.
Yeah. You've got end of life hardware. We see a lot of that, especially on firewalls. Yeah, that's a huge problem, and we cover that in the classes to kind of bring us back. Yeah, we cover making sure that you're scanning these firewalls, you're scanning these edge devices, and how to find new exploits for them and keep up with what's actually coming out.
That makes sense.
Yeah, you have to, otherwise you just get left behind.
And it's easy to get left behind very quickly.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So what would you like to see in a class? If you were going and you were going to take a class, say not Keelan now, Keelan from 3 or 4 years ago.
Right.
You're just really learning the pen testing stuff. You've done some IT, you know some stuff. What would you want to see in a class?
Someone who's willing to take the time to break down why they're looking into something, why this would be found or discovered. Basically placing everything into a sequence, like a pathway sequence, to understand exactly what to look for, why it's important to look for that, and also what vulnerabilities to look for and how often they change.
So chaining exploits, like attack chains, really?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I definitely try to focus on a lot of that. That's also hard to do because it's so dynamic, and you don't want people to think
change so often.
They do. You don't want people to think one track either. So I tried to show like a couple of entries and like a couple of next steps from those entries, and
I feel like
it's hard to do.
I feel like understanding the steps that are taking in a pen test engagement, but then also understanding how to basically draft a report that actually makes sense and that's efficient or valuable to a client. I feel like understanding all of that in a sequence.
Yeah, I felt bad because I kind of ran out of time on the reporting section. At the end of my day, I covered it. I was like, all right, guys, it's 4:00. They're going to kick us out. I'm going to stay here for 30 minutes and run through the reporting section. If you guys want to sit, most people stayed, which was really cool. But yeah, I showed them a sample report and showed them kind of like, these are the things you want to see. Well, not only the class, I'm trying to be realistic about who's in there, and it's a lot of people who are not going to be pen testers, but they're going to be pen tested.
Right.
And I'm like, so this is not only what you want to put in your report, this is what you should expect in your report.
Yeah.
Like if you don't have these things in your report, you need to question the validity of the testing that was done. You need to question the reporting manners itself, etc. But yeah, no, it's like I said, it's the most important thing. At the end of the day, that is your work that you deliver is the report.
Because the last thing anyone wants to do is pay for a pen test engagement, and they don't receive any value from the report.
Yeah, they just call you and they're like, "Yeah, man, we're done. I think we popped your firewall. I don't know, fix it later." Like you can't do that.
Especially in today's industry, because there's so many people who lack experience or skill sets, and maybe they're just getting started, and they're the ones having to respond to a lot of the stuff and also fix and manage or oversee patchings.
You got a lot of smaller companies where the IT people wear a lot of hats, where maybe there's 2 folks, 3 folks, 1 person, and they are the firewall guy, they're the exchange guy, they're the cloud guy, they're the security guy, they're doing, yeah, they're also a doctor. We've seen that. Yeah. We've definitely seen that. And I mean, that's the reality of a lot of it. And I think that's who I was also trying to talk to is, the IT guy who wears 7 hats.
I think that's awesome, especially for someone in that training course to understand, like, hey, you might as well get used to wearing multiple hats, because someday if you decide to jump ship, you go elsewhere, you're going to be wearing multiple hats, but at least you know what to look for.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely true. Yeah, so I guess circling it back a little bit. So I was, whenever we sat down to talk, thinking, okay, what can people do if they're developing training? So I think we kind of covered quite a bit of, at least what I tried to do.
Right.
So let's say, not just offensive security training, but the same kind of principles, right? For if you're wanting to develop training, not going too deep on something, but still making sure people can understand why it matters.
Right.
So showing impact, things like that. You could do that as well on blue team side of stuff, right?
Yeah, of course. Absolutely.
Yeah. So you could say, hey, we've got this detection. If you don't detect this, or if you don't change, this YARA rule this way, you won't pull this up. And then all of a sudden your machine's popped.
Yeah.
So I think, yeah, you can definitely do that. And then as far as the same thing of what's the next step, I mean, I think that applies on just about everything as well too.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah. So yeah, what'd you say? Keep it brief, but make sure people understand why what you're saying is important.
Yes.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
Because if anyone taking a traditional route, they're not going to break things down in that particular context or in that sequence.
Yeah. What I've noticed from a lot of the traditional education is they're going to spend, 4 weeks going over the OSI model, but they won't actually understand what they're doing.
It's more so to help them prepare for passing a certification exam.
That's fair.
Yeah.
That's fair. Yep. That's why we don't go hard on certifications here.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's fair. I love certs. There's some really good ones out there, but it doesn't necessarily mean you know what you're doing.
What are some of the top certifications that you would look for on a resume whenever you're interviewing for a pen tester position?
For a pen tester?
Yeah.
I like the PNCP a lot from TCM Security. It's good. It's a very realistic test where the attacks are realistic, the reporting process is realistic.
Right.
They have you deliver the report to a panel kind of like you would deliver it to a customer.
Yeah.
So I feel like people who have gone through that have a pretty good understanding, even if they've never pen tested before,
right, have
a pretty good understanding of like kind of what it's going to be like to an extent. For things that get a little more advanced, like the RTO, Red Team Operator, great certification. Really helps you to kind of understand like the entry level Cobalt Strike and that sort of stuff.
Right.
So that's very good. OSCP is not, it's always a plus, but I feel like people say like OSCP, that's the thing, right? Like you got to have OSCP. I don't agree with that, but it's still good. It's still pretty verbose. It still shows you a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
And then there's of course some specifics for web app and everything like that, but yeah, I would say those are kind of some of the main ones. I like to see specific technology certs more than anything, though. Where I like to see that you have, your Linux certs. I like to see that you have CCNP or CCNA. You understand the networking foundations. You have Windows, Windows certs. One of the best things also is to see like admin experience.
I was just about to say that.
I mean, like that's always going to trump any cert for me. Is I'll take somebody who was an admin for 2 years over just about any cert.
It's interesting because in our industry, most people with previous system administration experience, they tend to naturally understand what it is that we do. from a penetration testing perspective.
At the end of the day, a lot of what I'm doing is being a malicious admin.
Yeah.
Right? I'm just doing the exact same things administrators do in a really bad way.
Yeah.
And that's most of it. Yeah.
Because ultimately you want to gain the same level of access as a system administrator anyway.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's the goal. That's the goal. Yeah. I was on a panel the other day and I asked somebody about that. Aaron Moss, he's one of the guys at Secure Ideas. And I said, how much of what you do would you say is malicious system administration? And he thought about it and he was like, 100%.
100%.
Everything that I do. And I was like, that's what it is at the end of the day. So
a malicious sysadmin.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you got any other questions about kind of topic at hand of how to make your trainings not suck? Anything people can avoid?
In terms of becoming a penetration tester, we spoke briefly about how in a lot of organizations, many people wear multiple hats.
Mm-hmm.
What are the multiple hats that a penetration tester would wear? What are some of them?
Oh man, well, you're a technical writer.
Okay,
you're a technical writer. You're a public speaker. You're delivering a lot of reports. You're writing a lot of reports.
Yeah.
You got to be able to understand the networking side of things. You have to be able to understand the infrastructure side of things because you're dealing with the network, you're dealing with Windows servers, you're dealing with Linux servers, you're dealing with web administration. You have to be a web developer to some extent,
right?
Because you're going to be doing phishing at some point. Likely, you're going to have to make landing pages. You're going to have to make that infrastructure work. You're going to have to know. Yeah, like I said, full-blown Windows, Linux. You're likely using Linux.
Right.
And then depending on how deep you get into your specialties,
right,
that's where it really gets weird is you kind of have to pick a route. You get your generalist thing sort of at the top. And some people stay generalist all the way down like I've kind of tried to do, but a lot of people really get a specification. Whether that's like, I'm just going to fuzz everything and find CVEs, or like, I'm going to do web app pen testing and basically nothing else, or I'm going to go heavy into red team and I'm just going to look at, ways that I can get C2 profiles to do crazy things and avoid detection. Like you can really get your specifics there.
Yeah.
But as far as kind of the entry level hats, it's basically anything in IT.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
that makes a lot of sense. I like how you covered some of the specialties or specifics of the different pathways that some people they decide to take.
Yeah.
For
sure.
That's the only question I had.
All right. Well, man, thanks for sitting down and chatting with me today.
For sure.
Yeah. And everybody, thank you for coming and hanging out with us on another episode of Secure AF. Holler at us if you have any questions. You can reach out to either of us on LinkedIn if you want to ask any questions about the show, or you can drop a comment on any of the platforms below. We'll make sure we get you guys answered. You can say how much you hate us or how much you love us. I love when people talk some smack in the comments, so we love to hear it. All right. Thanks, everybody.
The Secure AF Podcast is a production of Alias Cybersecurity. Visit us online at aliascybersecurity.com. All rights reserved.